I want you to think back to November 30th, 2022. It was a Wednesday.
Just a normal Wednesday.
Right, exactly. And, when major technology enters our lives, there is usually this massive production around it. We anticipate the choreographed stage presentations, the sweeping press conference.
Oh, definitely the celebrity endorsements, the whole thing.
Yeah. You might even expect a slick, multi-million-dollar Super Bowl advertisement to signal that, hey, the ground underneath us is about to shift.
Because the tech industry relies on that pageantry. I mean, they usually want to tell us at maximum volume that the future has officially arrived.
But instead, what we got on that particular Wednesday was just, well, profound silence. There was no parade.
No parade at all.
Right. A company called OpenAI simply published a new product on their website. Just a single blog post and a minimalist link to a chat box.
And that product was ChatGPT.
Exactly. And what happened immediately following that quiet launch is the focal point of today's deep dive into our stack of research on the rise of generative AI.
Because, we are looking at a paradigm shift that materialized in a matter of days.
Literally days. So our mission today is to unpack the mechanics of that shift. We're going to figure out exactly how a technology that had been quietly incubating in research labs for decades suddenly became the fastest spreading consumer product in the entirety of human history.
It really was.
And we also need to understand the underlying mechanisms that forced the trillion-dollar tech industry to instantly panic and completely reorganize its entire architecture.
Yeah, the sheer velocity of that adoption really gives us the scale of the disruption.
Let's ground this in the numbers right out of the gate so you have some perspective. Within 5 days of that quiet little blog post, ChatGPT had 1 million users.
5 days? That's just wild.
I know, right? And in 2 months, it hit 100 million users. To put that in perspective for you, no technology had ever moved like that. It completely shattered the adoption curves of the telephone, the television, the internet.
The smartphone, all of it.
Yeah, it was an explosion.
But what's really fascinating here is that the true story of ChatGPT isn't about some sudden miraculous breakthrough that just, materialized out of thin air in late 2022.
Right, it wasn't magic.
Exactly. The reality in the research documents points to a much more grueling process. It is a story of intense idealism, the brutal mechanics of scaling up computing power, and the highly complex mathematical quests to make raw computational power actually listen to human intent.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really grasp why this specific launch broke the world, we have to look at the architectural limitations of the pre-2022 world.
You have to remember what AI used to be.
Right, we need to establish what AI meant to the professional class right before ChatGPT dropped.
So pre-2022 digital assistants like Siri or Alexa or Google Assistant, they relied heavily on rigid, hard-coded intent mapping.
Okay, what does that mean in plain English?
It means they were ubiquitous, but they were very narrow. You spoke a command, the system transcribed your speech to text, and then it hunted for specific keywords to trigger a pre-programmed script.
Oh, I see. So they were basically glorified voice-activated remote controls.
That's a perfect way to put it, yeah.
You ask it to turn on the lights or fetch the weather forecast, and it just executes that single isolated function, like a fancy digital egg timer.
Exactly. And they possessed almost zero contextual memory.
Right.
If you ask a follow-up question, the system essentially forgot who you were and what you were just talking about 10 seconds ago.
It's like talking to a goldfish.
Pretty much. You certainly couldn't ask those older architectures to, say, debug a Python script or brainstorm the structural outline for a marketing campaign.
But with ChatGPT, because the AI could suddenly maintain context across a long back-and-forth conversation, the boundaries of who could actually use it just vanished.
Completely vanished.
You didn't need to know code to talk to a supercomputer anymore. And that accessibility is what triggered the immediate panic in the professional world.
Yeah, because it didn't feel like a tool anymore.
Right, it felt like a hyper-competent intern sitting right at your desk.
Yeah.
I mean, you could paste in a broken piece of server code and ask, why isn't this working? And it would just isolate the bug.
And the immediate reaction documented across various industries really highlights this exact shift.
Oh, the panic was real.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Teachers were suddenly confronting essays that demonstrated human-level reasoning.
Right. The English departments were losing their minds.
Exactly. And lawyers found the system drafting highly competent legal briefs and summarizing complex case law in seconds.
Doctors too, right?
Yeah, doctors noted its ability to parse complex medical histories and output accurate, patient-friendly explanations.
Plus, you had programmers watching it write functional scripts across dozens of different programming languages. Literally, everyone stared at their screens, realizing their daily workflows were about to fundamentally change forever.
And the reason why it felt so different, why it mattered, is that by mastering fluent natural language, ChatGPT crossed a critical threshold.
How
Well, language is the fundamental operating system of human society. It's how we reason, it's how we build. A machine wielding language contextually wasn't just, doing math faster. It was actually synthesizing ideas.
it crossed the barrier from a tool to a collaborator.
Huh.
But looking at their early projects, though, there's a glaring disconnect in how they actually reached that point.
Yeah, it's a very weird trajectory.
Right. The origins of this leap didn't start with text generation at all. It started with a highly unusual corporate structure.
We have to travel back a bit to December 2015.
Okay, set the scene.
So OpenAI was founded by this roster of absolute heavy hitters. You had Elon Musk, Sam Altman, Greg Brockman, Wojciech Zaremba, and John Schulman.
A real tech all-star team.
Exactly. But crucially, they brought in Ilya Sutskever. Now, Sutskever was a foundational figure in deep learning. He came right out of Geoffrey Hinton's lab, having co-created AlexNet.
And AlexNet was the vision architecture that basically kicked off the modern AI boom, right?
Right. The technical pedigree there was immense, and they launched with a massive war chest over $1 billion in pledged funding right out of the gate.
$1 billion. But their mission statement was what really turned heads, wasn't it?
Oh, absolutely. They weren't building a specific software product. They announced very publicly that they were building artificial general intelligence.
AGI.
AGI, yes, for the benefit of humanity.
So, not just a better spell checker.
No, no. The mandate was to keep research open and freely shared, which is what drove the name OpenAI. Their goal was a machine that could outperform humans at most economically valuable work.
Okay, but here is where their strategy seems completely absurd to me. They have $1 billion to build a digital superbrain, and they spend their early years teaching a robotic hand to solve a Rubik's Cube.
Yeah, it looks a bit strange in hindsight.
And then they build an AI called OpenAI 5, just to play a complex strategy video game called Dota 2. I mean, how in the world do we get from beating professional video game players or twisting a plastic puzzle to writing a heartfelt poem or summarizing legal documents?
I get it. It looks like a massive detour. But if we connect this to the bigger picture, those early years were an incredibly necessary proving ground.
How so?
By taking on Dota 2, which, requires high-dimensional real-time decision-making, and that robotic hand, which requires incredibly complex physical simulation, they were test of their fundamental infrastructure.
Yeah. So it wasn't about the game at all.
Exactly. They proved their team could coordinate massive amounts of computing power to solve multi-layered problems.
So they were basically building the factory, even if they hadn't finalized what the product was going to be yet.
Precisely. They realized, however, that training robots in simulated physical environments or mastering games just wasn't going to scale quickly enough to ever reach AGI.
Because the physical world is too messy.
Too messy, too constrained. Text data on the internet, on the other hand, is virtually infinite, and it's already highly structured.
So they needed to pivot.
They needed to pivot entirely to language.
And that pivot to the generative pre-trained transformer, or GPT models, is where the timeline really accelerates.
Big time.
In 2019, they released GPT-2, and the results are so incredibly striking that OpenAI actually refuses to release the full model to the public.
Right. They explicitly cited concerns about the potential for malicious actors to generate disinformation at scale.
Which caused a huge uproar.
It really did. The industry reaction was fiercely divided. Many accused OpenAI of just generating artificial hype for a text generator.
Like a PR stunt.
Yeah, exactly. But others saw it as a necessary precedent for AI safety. Regardless of all that internal industry drama, though, GPT-2 proved that scaling up these models made them undeniably better at generating coherent text.
And that realization leads directly to 2020 and the arrival of GPT-3.
The monster.
This thing is an absolute monster. The source notes, it had 175 billion parameters.
Which is just a staggering number.
It is. For those trying to visualize that, think of parameters as the synapses in a digital brain. They are the numerical weights and connections that determine how the AI links different concepts together.
Right, connecting the concept of king to queen or rain to clouds.
Exactly. And 175 billion parameters was an utterly unheard of scale at the time.
It completely shattered the existing paradigms of what a language model could do without specific task training.
It could translate languages, write functioning code, draft news articles, compose philosophy.
Did it catch?
A big catch. Because raw GPT-3 was chaotic. If you got early access, you quickly realized it hallucinated facts with terrifying confidence.
And that's because it lacked intention. A raw large language model is essentially just a massive statistical engine designed to predict the next most probable word in a sequence based on its training data.
Right.
So if you prompted it with a question like, how do I break into a car?
Yeah.
It might happily output a step-by-step guide because it had ingested thousands of crime thrillers and security manuals.
It didn't know you wanted a helpful, safe answer. It just knew how to complete the pattern.
Exactly.
The analogy I use is that raw GPT-3 is like someone who has been locked in a room their entire life, but they've memorized every single book in the Library of Congress.
Oh, that's a good one.
Right. Like, they possess all the knowledge in the human world, but they have zero social skills and absolutely no moral compass. They don't know how to actually have a conversation with you.
Yeah, and taming that chaotic statistical engine required a massive infusion of capital and a completely new mathematical approach.
Enter Microsoft.
Enter Microsoft. They recognized the raw potential of GPT-3 and invested $1 billion into OpenAI.
Which secured them exclusive cloud computing rights.
Right, because OpenAI desperately needed Microsoft's
Don't forget to like and subscribe. We drop new episodes every Monday and Thursday.